We do have another guest with us here in studio who joined us as President Trump has been speaking. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is with us. And Congresswoman, it's great to have you with us here in studio as we keep an eye on President Trump there on the stage. We wanted to talk to you a bit about this 100-day mark. We have heard President Trump laying out what he says are clear successes over his first 100 days. We mentioned the economy, immigration. What is your report card, if you will, of his?
Well, my report card is that it's been 100 days of chaos, of sowing anxiety for the American people in terms of how they're going to pay their bills. It has been 100 days of destruction. And I think it's destruction not only of agencies, the firing of workers across the board, but also destruction of many of our fundamental constitutional rights. So just thinking about due process rights, thinking about freedom of speech, constitutional protections that are in Article 1 that the president and his team have paid no attention to. So I think the economic piece is huge, and I think the reality is people, and you see it on the polls, people have seen their costs dramatically increase. That's only going to get worse with this indiscriminate sweeping tariff policy that he's outlined. And by the way, you know, if you do strategic tariffs, it can be good, but you have to pair it with investments in domestic manufacturing. And he is actually stripping away all of the things that we passed in the CHIPS and Science Act, in the Inflation Reduction Act. So you've got both the sweeping tariffs and no investment in domestic manufacturing. That's just driving costs up for the American people.
I do want to ask you a bit about immigration as well, because President Trump pointing to what he has said is now a secure border, which wasn't the case during the Biden administration. And if you look at polling numbers, well, first of all, the number of crossings at the southern border have fallen dramatically. If you look at polling numbers, the only area where President Trump appears to be polling above 50% right now is his handling of border security, indicating that Americans are satisfied, or at least are happy with the fact that these numbers have fallen significantly.
Well, his numbers have actually fallen quite significantly on immigration. They just hit under 50% for the first time. I think it was 46 or 47%. Because here's the thing, he promised one thing. He promised that he was going to crack down on the worst of the worst, criminals, people who, you know, have committed crimes and are a threat to public safety. What he's actually doing is cracking down on thousands of students who have visas here. He's cracking down on legal permanent residents. The administration just deported 3 U.S. citizen children, including a child who was in the midst of cancer treatment. And so I think Americans are looking at this and saying, wait a second, this is not what you promised us. Of course, we all want order in our immigration system, and we desperately need reforms to the immigration system, but people don't want U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, people with legal status, people who have not committed a single crime and who have been here for a long time to be cracked down on. So I think you're going to see those numbers continue to go down, because what he promised is very different from what he's doing.
We should say that the administration said those children who you just referred to were not deported, that the mothers of those children...
They were deported. Whatever they say,
yeah,
they were deported and removed from the country
with their mothers,
without any due process. And they have, one of them at least, I have to go back and look, at least one of them has a U.S. citizen father. You can't just deport people. You have to have due process. In fact, the Supreme Court said that people have to have due process. That is a fundamental right.
Okay.
So to quibble about whether they were deported or whether the mother wanted them to be taken away, these are U.S. citizen children. And I think Americans are waking up to the fact that if he can deport somebody or kidnap, snatch, detain, and imprison somebody because he doesn't like what you say, and with no due process, that can happen to anyone.
If you hear what President Trump has been saying in his speech here, he has been saying, look, the polling is not accurate, the polling itself is corrupt, and what he is doing is restoring a golden age to the country, particularly by bringing back jobs that were sent to China. And you said, you know, tariffs can be an effective policy if done correctly. Do you think that we could start to see some of the fruits of this type of policy of bringing manufacturing back? We saw an investment he was talking about.
Not when you do it in this sweeping kind of way, indiscriminately. And, you know, if you look at how long it takes to build a manufacturing base. It takes time. You have to invest in it. That's why under the Biden administration, we actually put money into trying to build things in America again. But you got to go back to NAFTA, to many of the other trade agreements that push jobs overseas. And you have to look at how we can do this in a strategic way. But putting tariffs on Canada, on some of our best partners, indiscriminately with a chart that makes it seem like there's a formula. I looked at what that formula was. It was pretty crazy in terms of how you determine what tariffs people owe. Even if you look at the European Union, to say we have a trade deficit and not even look at services.
Yeah.
Makes no sense, right? So I think that this is clearly not an administration that appears to understand trade or tariffs in any way. And what's happening now is people are seeing it on their goods. They're seeing it with, when they buy shoes for their kids, when they buy strollers. That's where you're seeing this tax put on consumers.
Just quickly, Congresswoman, before we let you go, what can Democrats do then to push back against these policies?
Well, I think we're fighting very hard in the caucus, and you can see that Americans are responding. They don't want $880 billion cut to Medicaid. And so now even some Republicans are saying, wait a second, we don't want to do that. But it's going to take some Republicans standing with us. And we are, of course, continuing to fight in the courts, continuing to fight in the streets around public opinion. But at the end of the day, we just need 3 Republicans to come over and vote with us and stop this chaos, stop the stripping of Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, Department of Education, all of these things. I don't think that's what the American people signed up for, and I think you're seeing it reflected in the polls.
Congresswoman Jayapal, very good to have you in our studio tonight. Thank you so much for